In the summer of 1914, a cataclysm descended upon Europe, plunging the continent and ultimately the world into a war unlike any seen before. Decades of simmering tensions, rivalries, and secret alliances finally reached a boiling point, setting the stage for a conflict that would shatter empires and redefine the very nature of warfare. The spark that ignited this powder keg was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo. This act of violence served as the catalyst, but the true fuel of the war lay in the years of escalating tensions between the great powers of Europe. A complex web of alliances snapped into action, drawing nation after nation into the conflict. The great powers, confident in their military strength and bound by treaty obligations, mobilized millions of men, preparing for what they believed would be a swift and decisive victory. A wave of patriotic fervor swept across Europe, with young men eagerly enlisting, convinced the war would be a glorious adventure, over by Christmas and a testament to their nation's strength. Little did they know the horrors that awaited them. The German army, implementing the Schlieffen Plan, swept through neutral Belgium into France, violating international treaties and sparking outrage across the globe. Their objective was clear: to encircle Paris and knock France out of the war before Russia, with its vast but slow-to-mobilize army, could pose a significant threat. The French and British forces, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the German advance, fought desperate, delaying battles at Mons and the Marne, struggling to hold the line and prevent the fall of Paris. But the initial war of movement, characterized by rapid advances and sweeping maneuvers, quickly stalled as the opposing armies clashed in a series of bloody encounters. The advent of modern weapons, a product of the Industrial Revolution, played a crucial role in this shift. Machine guns, capable of unleashing a torrent of bullets, and rapid-firing artillery able to obliterate entire formations, transformed the battlefield into a killing zone. These new technologies rendered old tactics such as massed infantry assaults and cavalry charges not only ineffective but also deadly and obsolete. Generals, often clinging to outdated strategies and slow to adapt to the realities of modern warfare, continued to order mass charges against heavily defended positions. These ill-conceived attacks resulted in catastrophic losses, with entire generations of young men decimated for little or no territorial gain. As the offensive capabilities of modern weaponry overwhelmed the defensive tactics of the time, the war of movement ground to a complete halt. Both sides, exhausted and depleted, dug in, seeking shelter from the relentless artillery fire and machine gun barrages, unable to break the deadlock. Initially, soldiers began with shallow pits and rudimentary trenches, offering minimal protection from the enemy, but as the stalemate dragged on, these temporary fortifications evolved into deeper, more complex trench systems, a testament to the war's grinding nature. The Western Front, stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border, became a vast, fortified line of trenches, a scar across the face of Europe. The age of the trench had begun, ushering in a new and horrific chapter in the history of warfare. This entrenchment shattered any remaining hope for a quick, decisive victory, condemning the combatants to years of brutal, attritional warfare. The world had entered a new era of warfare, an era of industrialized killing on an unprecedented scale. It was one defined not by swift battles and heroic charges, but by endurance, resilience, and the sheer will to survive in the face of unimaginable hardship. The initial wave of optimism and patriotic fervor that had swept across Europe in 1914 quickly faded. The reality of industrialized slaughter, the relentless shelling, and the constant threat of death shattered illusions and replaced them with a grim understanding of the war's true nature. The trenches, with their mud, blood, and constant presence of death, would become the defining symbol of the First World War, a lasting testament to its brutality and futility. The war's opening months, with their initial hopes and swift reversals, had irrevocably set the stage for years of unimaginable hardship, suffering, and loss. The soldiers who marched off to war in high spirits, filled with patriotic fervor and dreams of glory, now faced a grim, unending struggle for survival in the muddy, rat-infested trenches of the Western Front. The old world, with its empires, its certainties, and its illusions of progress, was gone, shattered by the guns of August. It was replaced by a desolate landscape of mud, barbed wire, and death, a testament to the destructive power of modern warfare. The war to end all wars, as it was optimistically called, had only just begun, and its true cost was yet to be revealed. The hopes and dreams of an entire generation would be buried in the trenches, lost to the insatiable appetite of the war machine. The world would never be the same, forever scarred by the horrors of the Great War. The story of the trenches, a story of unimaginable suffering and resilience, was just beginning, and its echoes would resonate for generations to come. After the initial German advance was finally halted at the Marne, a crucial turning point in the early stages of the war, both sides, locked in a desperate struggle for control, raced north, each relentlessly trying to outflank the other, seeking a decisive advantage that would break the stalemate. This frantic series of maneuvers became known as the Race to the Sea. It was a desperate attempt to gain ground and avoid being encircled. The result wasn't the breakthrough either side desperately sought, but instead a continuous battle line that stretched, unbroken, from neutral Switzerland all the way to the shores of the North Sea. With no room to maneuver, soldiers dug in for survival, seeking refuge from the relentless artillery fire and machine gun attacks. They began turning shallow scrapes in the earth into deep, elaborate and permanent trench systems, a network of fortified lines. The Western Front was born, a continuous line of trenches that would define the conflict for years to come. It became a scar across Europe, a physical manifestation of the war's brutality, hundreds of miles long. The battlefield became static, a landscape of entrenched positions and fortified lines. It was a fortified deadlock where movement was nearly impossible and attacks were met with devastating firepower. Generals' dreams of glorious cavalry charges, a staple of warfare for centuries, and sweeping maneuvers across open fields were rendered utterly useless by the machine gun and barbed wire. The war became a grinding war of attrition, a brutal contest of endurance. Victory was no longer measured in ground gained, but in the staggering number of lives lost. The trenches themselves evolved quickly, adapting to the constant threat of enemy fire and attacks. Zigzag patterns were implemented to limit the damage from shells and prevent the enemy from firing down the length of a trench. Multiple lines, front, support and reserve, were connected by a network of communication trenches, allowing for the movement of troops and supplies. Barbed wire, a cruel and unforgiving barrier, and the desolate expanse of no man's land separated the opposing armies, creating a deadly, desolate wasteland. The new reality demanded new strategies and tactics, a complete rethinking of how war was waged. But for now, both sides were trapped, stuck in a seemingly endless cycle of attack and defense. They were locked in a brutal embrace, unable to break free from the deadly stalemate. The trenches were not just defensive positions, they were prisons, confining soldiers to a world of mud, rats and constant fear. The landscape of war had changed forever, transformed into a desolate wasteland of trenches and barbed wire. The hope for a quick victory, the initial spark that ignited the conflict, was now completely gone. The only certainty that remained was the endless suffering of the men trapped in the trenches. The world watched in horror as the Western Front descended further and further into a living nightmare. The Western Front was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of trenches, dugouts and barbed wire stretching nearly 500 miles. The frontline trench was the most dangerous, with support and reserve trenches behind, all linked by communication trenches. Earthbanks, sandbags and fire steps offered some protection, but death was always near. Barbed wire in front of the trenches slowed attackers, making them easy targets for machine guns. The German trenches, often on higher ground, were deeper and more fortified, sometimes lined with concrete and equipped with deep dugouts. The battlefield was static, impersonal and industrial. Artillery and machine guns ruled, and the enemy was often unseen, a distant presence in the mud. The war became a contest of endurance, with each side trying to inflict maximum casualties. The Western Front was not about capturing cities, but about holding the line at any cost. The individual soldier's skill mattered less than the overwhelming power of modern weapons. The trenches changed the very nature of war. The world watched as the front became a symbol of futility and sacrifice. The Western Front was a graveyard of hope. Life in the trenches was a daily battle, a relentless struggle against the elements. Mud was everywhere, a constant companion seeping into everything. Filth was inescapable, an ever-present reality. And then there was the fear, a gnawing, ever-present dread that permeated every waking moment. The fields of Flanders, once fertile and green, became a quagmire, a landscape transformed into a muddy hell. Constant rain, coupled with relentless artillery shelling, turned the ground into a seemingly endless sea of mud, swallowing everything in its path. Men stood in it, fought in it, and even tried to sleep in it, their bodies constantly soaked and chilled. Some tragically even drowned in the deep water-filled shell craters that dotted the landscape, a testament to the unforgiving conditions. Sanitation was almost non-existent, a luxury they could scarcely afford in this brutal environment. Latrines were crude, often overflowing, and the stench was utterly overwhelming, a constant assault on the senses. The unburied bodies that lay scattered in no man's land, a gruesome testament to the fighting, served as grim and constant reminders of the terrible cost of the war, a sight that haunted the living. Disease was rampant, spreading quickly through the crowded and unsanitary trenches. Dysentery, typhoid and cholera thrived in the filth, weakening the men and adding to their suffering. Rats, growing fat and bold on the corpses that littered the battlefield, infested the trenches in vast numbers, while lice tormented the men, crawling over their bodies and spreading the debilitating trench fever. The constant threat of death hung over every moment, a shadow that never lifted. Shells could fall at any time. Snipers lurked in the shadows, and sudden raids could erupt without warning, able to kill indiscriminately and without warning. The psychological toll of this constant stress and horror was immense, leaving deep scars on the minds of the soldiers. Many men suffered from what became known as shell shock, a condition that left them unable to cope with the relentless terror and trauma of the trenches. Existence was reduced to the most basic of needs, a desperate struggle for survival. Staying dry, finding something to eat, and simply surviving another day became the sole focus of their lives. The trenches stripped life down to its barest core, revealing the raw and brutal reality of war. The mud and the ever-present fear were as deadly and relentless as any enemy soldier. The war's true horror was not just in the grand battles and the large-scale offensives, but in the daily, grinding struggle to endure the unimaginable conditions. The trenches were a world of unrelenting misery, a place where hope seemed to wither and die. In such a place, mere survival, making it through another day, was a victory in itself, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Amid chaos, strict routine kept soldiers sane. Each day began before dawn with stand to, every man on alert for attack. After sunrise, the men stood down, but their work continued. Chores filled the day, cleaning rifles, checking for trench foot and repairing the ever-crumbling trenches. Rum rations and breakfast offered brief comfort. Maintenance was endless. Sandbags, duckboards and barbed wire needed constant attention. Wiring parties risked their lives at night crawling into no man's land to repair defenses. Supplies and mail arrived under cover of darkness, and units rotated between front support and reserve lines. The routine was both a blessing and a curse, structure in chaos but also a grinding, exhausting cycle. The day ended as it began, with another stand to at dusk. Night brought a flurry of activity, but also new dangers. For the soldiers, routine was survival. It was the only thing that made the horror bearable, the war ground on day after day. The deadlock of the trenches was enforced by devastating new weapons. Machine guns like the Vickers and Maxim could mow down waves of attackers, making no man's land a killing ground. Artillery dominated the battlefield, with barrages that shattered earth and men alike. Bombardments lasted for days, but often failed to break the enemy's defenses. Poison gas added a new terror, silent, invisible and deadly. Gas masks became essential, but fear lingered with every shifting wind. Tanks appeared in 1916, slow and unreliable, but able to cross trenches and crush wire. The tank hinted at the future, but in the trenches, the killing continued. Each new weapon escalated the horror, but rarely changed the outcome. The war became a test of endurance, not ingenuity. The weapons of the trenches defined a new kind of warfare. The battlefield was a laboratory of death. The cost was measured in lives. The most dreaded order was to go over the top, to leave the trench and charge into no man's land. Soldiers, weighed down with gear, advanced in lines under relentless machine gun fire. The ground was a maze of mud, craters and barbed wire. Many never made it past their own lines. Defenders, sheltered in deep dugouts, emerged to mow down attackers as the shelling lifted. Those who reached the enemy trench faced brutal hand-to-hand combat. Even a captured trench was hard to hold. Counterattacks were swift and deadly. The cost was staggering, the gains minimal. Going over the top became a symbol of the war's futility. Each attack consumed thousands of lives for a few yards of ground. The horror of attack haunted every soldier. The trenches devoured hope. The names Somme and Passchendaele became synonymous with slaughter and futility. At the Somme in 1916, a week-long bombardment failed to break German defences. On the first day, nearly 60,000 British casualties, 20,000 dead, shattered illusions of glory. The battle dragged on for months, with tanks making their debut but failing to turn the tide. By November, the Allies had advanced just 6 miles at a cost of over 1 million casualties. The Somme became a byword for pointless sacrifice. In 1917, Passchendaele brought even worse conditions. Endless rain, mud and drowning men. The battlefield became a swamp. Rifles and tanks were useless. After 3 months, the village was captured. But the cost was another 500,000 casualties. Passchendaele symbolized the madness and suffering of trench warfare. These battles left scars that would never heal. The world saw the true price of industrial war. The Western Front was a vision of hell. Amid the horror, camaraderie was a lifeline. Soldiers from all backgrounds forged deep bonds, relying on each other for survival. Gallows humor, songs, and makeshift concerts offered brief escapes from the nightmare. Letters from home were treasured, connecting men to a world beyond the trenches. Unofficial truces sometimes broke out, moments of shared humanity in the midst of war. The Christmas truce of 1914 was the most famous, but smaller truces happened throughout. These acts of decency showed the resilience of the human spirit. Even in darkness, hope endured. By 1918, the deadlock was broken. Fresh American troops, new tactics, and exhausted Germans led to the war's end. The trenches left deep scars on Europe and its people. Millions returned home wounded in body and mind, haunted by what they'd endured. The war shattered old certainties and transformed society. The memory of the trenches shaped future conflicts as leaders vowed never to repeat the horror. The world was forever changed by the lessons of the Western Front. The trenches stand as a warning, a monument to the cost of industrialized war. Their legacy endures, a scar on the world's conscience.